Good morning and happy Friday, and welcome back to another live stream of DD Geopolitics. I am your hostess, and I'm here with John. Of course, John, how are you this morning?
Oh, doing good, Sarah. The sun is shining, and just in time for a dark cloud to roll in.
The sun's not shining for long as we introduce our guest for today, former Navy nuke and professional cynic, geopolitical analyst, Mark Sleboda. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me. It is always an honor and a pleasure to be on Double D Geopolitics. Happy New Year to both of you and yours.
What are we drinking today?
Duchesse.
There we go. So we're going to
Russian pear soda, half sweet Russian pear soda for those who don't know. And I have to get something off my chest, right? Because your show still has by far and above the best introduction of anything to do with the Ukrainian conflict. But there's one particular moment, about 2.5 minutes, that what I can only assume is one of the Minsk format meetings. And it is a row of Zelensky, Merkel, Macron, and Putin. And Putin is speaking into the mic very seriously. And down past Merkel and Macron, Zelensky is sitting there just smirking and smarming up a storm and laughing at Putin and, trying to get these, looks to Merkel and Macron. Like, you see, one day when Russian forces take Kiev and take Zelensky into custody, or I don't know, maybe he flees and shows up in Brooklyn with Juan Guaido and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and they take up an apartment somewhere together and protect their country leaders. But hopefully someday he'll meet the wrong end of an ice pick on that story. But whatever it is, I want that moment, that clip played for him again. I want that rubbed in his face, because that every time I see it, I want to hit something. I want to hit that smarming, smirking little piece of feces.
I mean, how much younger does he look? He's aged quite a bit from that clip too. I mean, he looks like a kid.
Yeah, he looks like a child now. He looks like a haggard drug addict. But
to be fair, I looked a little bit younger back then too.
I think it's aged us all.
Yeah, I think it's aged us all. But we are going to talk about the Russian armed forces currently wiping some of the smirk off of Zelensky's face, maybe in the Kursk region. Let's play a little recap of some of the bigger events that happened recently.
Дорогі українці, українки.
lots of Western equipment, the lots of surrendering POWs. The Chechens are in there, Apti, Ludinov is in there. What are your current thoughts on the situation in Kursk? And maybe like a little bit of a refresher for some of our listeners. If you don't know, there was we call it the Kursk Safari, but there was a very stupidly and ridiculous offensive in the Kursk region of Russia. So, Mark, I do want to know your thoughts on this, the current situation.
Okay, so first of all, that's a really cool tune, and I feel the need now to make it old fashioned and watch some war porn to that tune again. I mean, that's pretty dark, pretty cool.
We'll send you the clip. Yeah, we'll send you the clip.
We'll send you the clip. Anyway, so yeah, Kursk. I like to call it the Kursk Fool's Crusade. Right. And, right off the bat, the Western mainstream media, when it started back in August, the Western mainstream media jumped on it. They were applauding it and cheerleading it. They were so happy. They were so excited. Yeah, give it to Putin. And, even though there was a few voices, like what is this all for? Kursk is a backwater, right? In the entire original Kursk incursion zone, the only the largest settlement that the Kiev regime managed to take is the town, the village, really, of Suja. And today, now that the Kursk incursion zone has been gnawed away to it's about 40%. They've lost about 60% of it thus far. It's pretty much just a pocket around Suja, and Suja before the incursion had a population of somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people. That's it, right? That's the biggest. Everything else is even smaller hamlets and villages, and nothing else you can even properly call a town, right? Which actually, of course, makes it very hard for the Kiev regime forces. They don't have buildings to barrack and hide their troops and vehicles in, right? So the whole thing, unless the goal, as many suspect, I think it's pretty clear, as Russian forces, they intended to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant, and perhaps possibly there may have been some storage of tactical nuclear weapons in the nearby town to the Kursk nuclear power plant of Karenova. But they never got anywhere close, right? They never got close to Karenova, to the Kursk nuclear power plant. And the fact that they've, just continued to pour reinforcements after mass forced conscripts of reinforcements into this Kursk incursion zone. You called it a death trap, a fire bat, whatever you want to call it. It's quite obvious whether Russian forces did know about it beforehand and let it happen, or they just exploited the situation and took care of it. They have caused an immense amount of both gear and manpower damage to the Kiev regime forces. I've seen some from Russian government sources claiming that the Kursk incursion in the last few months cost the Kiev regime more military equipment than the entire 2023 southern offensive in the Zaporozhye area, which is, massive. And all the while they've been Zelensky has been fixated on this, they have not been supplying reinforcements to an actual strategic area of the conflict, i.e. the Russian steamroller in the southwest Donbass, Ugledar, Donetsk, Sleboda, now Krahova. Donetsk has finally fallen in the last few days for all intents and purposes, and now Pokrovsk itself is being put into pinchers. But reinforcements aren't going there. Instead, they've been going to Kursk. In the past week, we've seen something that in the Western press, for some reason, and the Kiev regime, they're talking about as a second Kursk offensive, or a counteroffensive, or a counteroffensive. They really obviously have no indication. To call this an offensive is actually should be offensive to anyone who knows anything about military affairs. This is a local counterattack, right? It's a significant local counterattack, right? But the forces involved in this, in terms of both manpower and the equipment, is maybe a brigade, probably an understrength brigade. That's it, right? This has not actually been such a big deal. And quite obviously, there's no question this time. The Russians knew it was coming. They knew where it was going, in the direction of this village of Bolshoya Soldatskaya, or Big Soldier, right? Why they were attacking there, I have no clue. I have not met anyone who can explain to me what the purpose. If they had been moving again in the direction of the Kursk nuclear power plant to the northwest of the incursion zone, I could understand that, right? It'd still be suicidal, but I could understand the intent. But going to the northeast to Bolshaya Soldatska, why? I don't understand. I haven't met anyone who can explain it. I haven't heard any Kiev regime, on social media, their own soldiers and interlocutors that can explain it. Russia knew they were coming. They had Ka-52 alligators already pre-positioned to help deal with it. The Kiev regime evidently was showcasing some new electronic warfare capability, I guess supposedly provided by the West, that while it appears to have had some success in a short sphere radius, leading up their mine clearing tank vanguard, Russia has already become very proficient and very dominant use of drones with fiber optic cables, minuscule. I still have no idea how they really work in practice, how they don't get stuck on things. I don't understand it, to be perfectly honest. But there's no question to everyone's surprise, I think that they do work, and they work very effectively, and they're immune to electronic warfare jamming. So as soon as that capability was identified, it was dealt with, and all of everything switched to the fiber optic cables, and everything was dealt with, right? They surged forward a few streets in hamlets in that direction, in 3 hamlets. That's it. And they've been driven back out of most of that already. They haven't been able to press forward any further. And as to the idea this was some kind of surprise, the Kiev regime's own interlocutors on social media have been complaining that 2 days before it was launched, Spanish military bloggers were discussing exactly the attack plan and where it would go and everything. So this was, if Spanish military bloggers knew about it, I'm sure the Kremlin did as well, the Russian military intelligence. So this was really no surprise to anyone, at least on the battlefield. Now, I have to say, I have been talking or predicting a Kiev regime offensive for some time. It's not anything that should be a surprise to anyone. Sersky himself admitted back the end of November, beginning of December, that they were going to launch new offensive. We've seen large numbers of Western equipment, including hundreds of U.S. strikers. Australia sent like 50 Abrams, large amounts of ammunition. Germany sent military vehicles. The Kiev regime has conducted a large mass forced conscription over the last few months that, even if it didn't meet its goals, which they admit it certainly did not, they didn't find enough people to grab off the street, but they still got enough people supposedly to man up the supposedly 14 new brigades. Now, how well they fight, we've seen with the mass desertion of the 155th, despite the French training, that's another question. But they have built up new brigades. They have kitted them out with Western gear, and we haven't seen them on the battlefield yet. From what we've heard from the reports of Russian forces on the ground in this new Kursk counterattack, I don't want to call it Kursk Fool's Crusade 2.0. Can we call it Kursk Fool's Crusade 1.2? Maybe because it doesn't warrant a whole number, but large numbers, up to half of the troops involved in this were prisoners, were criminals, convicts, right? Which Russia, Wagner, and the Russian Ministry of Defense have done the same thing and everything. But just to make clear that many of these were what the Kiev regime military would have absolutely considered disposable troops, right? So this is not a major offensive. It was not intended to be a major offensive. It failed whatever its goal was, right? Even if the goal was to convince Trump ahead of his inauguration that Kiev is still in the fight, 2 days after it was launched, Kellogg, Trump's envoy to the Ukraine conflict, supposedly canceled his trip to Kiev until after the inauguration. So I don't know if the two are connected, but quite obviously he wasn't impressed. We'll say that. It's been a failure. But I also think that we haven't seen yet the Kiev regime's winter offensive. Mm-hmm. It's going to come from somewhere, right? Bryansk, Zaporozhye, across the Kakhovka the former Kakhovka reservoir to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, maybe even towards Transnistria or Belgorod. But we've seen buildups of Kiev regime forces being discussed by Russian forces on the ground in all of these places. So in one of them, I still think that we'll probably see an attempt at an offensive. But it's probably going to have to wait a bit. I'm guessing that it has been, shall we say, rain postponed. And when I say that, I mean literally rain postponed, because the weather has been terrible for offensives for the last 10 days over the holiday season, and is scheduled for the next week, right? Good winter fighting weather, and winter is fighting time in this part of the world, is consistently 10 degrees below 0 Celsius for a good month, right? Till the ground gets nice and hard and firm, and fields can support tanks and military vehicles moving across them, that they're not restricted to the use of roads and the like. That's not what we're seeing on the battlefield right now. There was an initial cold spell in the end of November and beginning of December, but now the weather has turned unseasonably warm. It is like, say, in Pokrovsk right now, it is like 10 degrees Celsius. So like what would be like 40 Fahrenheit, something well above freezing, and it's raining, right? This is bad offensive weather, right? It doesn't mean you can't conduct an offensive, but if you were preparing for large across field, tank drives and military vehicles, this isn't weather to do that, right? And maybe the same thing, in the direction of Bryansk or across the former Kakhovka reservoir. Now's not the time for that. So I still think we will likely see the Kiev regime try another suicidal Fool's Crusade offensive. Again, Bryansk, Zaporozhye, somewhere there likely, but it's probably been paused. It's probably going to wait for colder weather at this moment.
Interesting. Well, everything in the background. I don't know. We're getting a little bit of feedback here. Oh. Well, in the background of this looming is the inauguration. 10 days away. Can you believe we're 10 days away from Trump's inauguration?
Trump. I completely.
Did we completely? So it'll be interesting, and we'll get to that because I definitely want to hear your thoughts and maybe your predictions for the Trump administration. But before we get quite there, maybe we can stay focused on the short term. It's like I said, it's 10 days. The clock is ticking in terms of kind of setting up the chess pieces for potential negotiations with the Trump administration. From the Russian point of view, you gave us kind of some insights into this potential offensive coming some other time in the winter with from Ukraine. But how is Russia looking to kind of conduct its activities over the next 10 days? Is it kind of just looking to maintain the current state of affairs, Mark, and focus more on the south as they have been in Donetsk?
Sure. Yeah, they're absolutely staying the course. And right now, of course, Kharkov has been wrapped up. Donetsk has been all but wrapped up. The Russian Ministry of Defense will, I'm sure, announce that Donetsk has been fully liberated in the next week. Russian forces are already moving on from Donetsk. It took a few months, but I mean, there's still some demining and debooby trapping and maybe a few Ukrainian forces cowering in basements somewhere. But for all intents and purposes, Russian forces are already moving past Donetsk. So we're going to see that. There's a big breakthrough in the Kupiansk area. With a crossing, a buildup on the right hand of the Zherebets River. Russian forces are making surprising breakthrough in that area as well. So as well as Pokrovsk, keep your eye on that. And Chasiv Yar also looks to be on its last days as well. We're going to see Kharkov and Donetsk and Chasiv Yar all in and possibly even Kupiansk moving on then to Liman in very short order of time. And we'll see probably Pokrovsk properly invested here in the coming weeks and a siege of that over the next 2 or 3 months. I think Pokrovsk will generally go faster than a lot of people. And past Kharkov, operational space all the way to the banks of the Dnieper River. No significant geographic barriers, no big urban centers, all the way to Dnipropetrovsk city itself and Pavlograd and Zaporozhye city there. So lots of possibilities. Russian forces are literally a handful of kilometers from the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region there, and there is nothing. Of course, there's also not, until they get to the Dnieper, there's also not a lot of value in there in strategic terms, but it is space that needs to be crossed. Big there. The Biden is not done yet, right? He's still got another 10 days. Just today, the Biden administration announced what it's calling sweeping new oil sanctions against Russia, against Gazprom Neft and another Russian oil company, and against Russia's fleet of shadow tankers. Right? I love this. That makes it sound really cool, like Babylon 5 or something like that. A shadow fleet evidently is any fleet that doesn't get its insurance out of London and so isn't completely controlled by the West. That is the definition of a shadow fleet. But a fleet of tankers that they don't control, they're going to attempt to play, shall we say, sanctions, so legal whack-a-mole against, which seems kind of a fruitless endeavor to me, because a lot of these transfers are taking place with transponders turned off at sea, and the oil is transferred to another legal tanker, and we see this oil laundering going on with the Greeks, the Turks, the Indian. This is taking place on a massive scale. So I don't expect that these sanctions will have any significant effect other than the market will make the usual instinctive, stupid market reaction, and we'll see prices jump. And ultimately, it's just going to cause more inflation to American consumers. Enjoy. But it has to be said, Biden has stayed away from this option up until now because he had an election to win, and presumably either he or Kamala Harris would be carrying on. Well, now, if inflation strikes the American economy even worse, what does Biden care now? He's gone. This is Trump's problem. So he can, basically leave an old man dump on Trump's economic schedule with this. So I don't think it's going to have any serious effect on Russia's capability in the media, economic capability in the medium term, no more than this cutting off of gas to Slovakia and Hungary and Austria and Italy. And Transnistria is going to suffer, of course, from the gas shutoff, and things could happen. I would be very surprised if we escape 2025 without the conflict expanding into Moldova. I would be very surprised if that happens, right? Transnistria is going to be facing a humanitarian crisis that Russia cannot stop in the next 2 months, right? They have no energy, right? They're relying on coal reserves at the moment. They're getting no gas now because they got their gas off of this Druzhba pipeline. And Moldova, they've already made allowances for Moldova. They're paying for expensive American LNG to be shipped up from Greece. But of course, none of that is going to go to Transnistria. So Transnistria, the lights are already on rolling blackouts. And within, I don't know, like 40 some days, they'll be out and the lights will be off in the winter for good. And Russia can't do anything about it. Okay.
It's me. Sorry. Since we're on the topic of Transnistria, what about Gagauzia? Because she's been quite vocal, the leader of Gagauzia, sure, Eugenia, about her preferences and that Maya Sandu is not even a legitimate leader. But what will they also be affected by this, I'm guessing?
It's entirely possible. I don't know how the Moldovan energy grid is provided. If they can cut Gagauzia off, I'm sure they will, right? If they can easily do that, just to punish them before that. But I mean, we have to be realistic, I think, about the possibilities of Gagauzia going on its own when Transnistria is in the type of tight situation that they're in. So I just think it's the perfect way for Zelensky. He can't win on the battlefield, right?
Wait, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. And I'm going to show you right now because Zelensky has one. Watch.
For example, take the Kursk operation. It's one of our wins. I think one of the biggest wins, not just last year, but throughout the war. Russia had to pull almost 60,000 troops of the Ukrainian front to deal with it.
I know they moved a few hundred troops from Volchansk. Right?
How do you explain that?
I mean, it's just, he has invested so much political capital, personal political capital, into this Kursk Fool's Crusade that he's got to, I guess, I don't know, even we at least until this 1.2 started in the last week, even the Western mainstream media had finally gotten over their incursion high and sobered up and admitted that it was a failure and they're losing badly and they lost large amounts of manpower and equipment for no discernible strategic purpose. The BBC interviewing Ukrainian troops in the doldrums and pits of despair, right, in Kursk. And so he is living, Zelensky is still living in his own naked emperor's imaginary world, and he can say this, but even the Western mainstream media at this point has sobered up on Kursk, at least until the last week. And maybe that's the entire purpose of 1.2, right? Because everything is about the information war. Nothing is about the actual war on the battlefield, right? Thousands Ukrainian troops desert from one French trained brigade, the 155th. Karahava falls. Donetsk is liberated. Got to change the topic of conversation somehow. So that is 1.2 as far as I can tell. But this temporary information war blip will pass too. Right? That's all I can say.
Well,
So,
the reason why I also play that is because I want to come back into the America and the inauguration coming up, because what started off as we're going to get this conflict wrapped up in 24 hours after the after the election. If I win, then it was 24 hours after the inauguration, and now we are at 100 days from the inauguration to get this wrapped up.
That's what Kellogg is saying, and Trump is now talking at least 6 months. Trump himself said at least 6 months. So at least it appears that someone in the Trump administration did at least a little bit of homework and said, "Oh, wait a minute, we actually, this is going a lot worse than we thought it was," and then we don't have as much leverage as we thought we did. So they're getting there. Trump has made a couple of key statements, right? I do not expect any type of deal to end this conflict. I'll be first out. I have no doubt that at some point Putin and Trump will meet and they'll talk. And then some point after that, Kellogg will present a deal on American terms, right? And Russia, the Kremlin will say, yes, that's very nice. And we appreciate that you're at least showing the sense to talk to us now, but you don't get to dictate the terms to us, right? You are not some outside arbiter of this conflict. You are a party to this conflict. And what's more, you're a party to the losing side of this conflict, right? Even if you want to try and blame it all now on Biden, right? Even though we remember the sanctions that you leveled against us and that you started arming the Kiev regime, right? You want to try and blame it all on Biden now. But now that you're the American president, you bought this, you own this, right? And the capability of you just walking away from it and handing it over to us, we know that's not going to happen. We're not going to take your terms. We've already presented our terms. If you won't accept them, then we'll continue on the battlefield. Thanks, spasiba, no, niet spasiba. No, thanks, but no thanks.
No, yeah.
And after that, what is Trump going to do? That's the most important thing. What will the people around him tell him to do? But there is no potential for America to present a deal to the Kremlin that the Kremlin would accept at this point. None. I can't imagine it. If you can tell me what it looks like on a piece of paper and why anyone in the Kremlin would even wipe their butt with that piece of paper after the last few years of broken American deals and treaties and everything else, I can't tell you. But Russia is not going to stop at this point. Whatever they may even say about their official goals, which haven't changed except to get stronger since this conflict began. I think that the real conversation in the Kremlin, right, and we've heard as much, at least from Medvedev and Lavrov and a couple of others, is that this conflict does not end until regime change in Kiev and almost certainly the Polish border, right? It doesn't end until then. Whatever Trump's hopes or inclinations or King Trump of Greenland or whoever he is this week, I don't know. But I just don't believe that he can, as the American president, that he can walk away. And anything less than that, I don't think Russia would be willing to accept at this point. So I actually don't think that much about Trump or the inauguration. And I don't think that the Kremlin, they'll talk to him, but they've already experienced the Trump presidency. They don't exactly have good feelings about the man. So they're in the driver's seat. They're winning, and they know that there's nothing the U.S. can do at this point. So why would they stop? They've said they have no interest in a ceasefire. Why would they? Why would they give them time to rearm and retrain the Kiev regime? I think that the only way there will ever be peace in Ukraine is once this Maidan Putsch is removed root and branch from Kiev and beyond. And the US, it just isn't going to agree to that, of course. I mean, Karahava. So finally, Karahava was the last place where the Kiev regime could fire normal artillery and hit Donetsk. So for the first time since 2014, the poor people of Donetsk had a holiday season that was free from artillery shells. And what happened in the last 24 hours? They wasted a HIMARS to hit the residential heart of Donetsk city, a HIMARS, right? Which means that it was fully agreed to by the United States, because the New York Times told us long ago that the targeting information for every single HIMARS shot is approved and provided, satellite data by the United States. So they can't hit it with any normal artillery, but they wasted a HIMARS to remind the people of Donetsk just of their spite. You can't deal with these people. You can't sign anything with these people. They will never stop. They will never stop. They will have to be driven out, and even then there'll be a guerrilla war out of Poland. Fine, we'll deal with that, when it comes. But I do not expect any peace deal ending this conflict this year or ever. I don't think this conflict will end this year. I think Donbass will be liberated by the end of the year in its entirety. But by then, Russia will also be well into Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkov region and possibly elsewhere at this point. We'll see the mass forced conscription of 18-year-olds and up in Ukraine. That'll provide them with another 300 or 400,000 and another year or a year and a half of troops that need to be eroded away. Might call up women as well, but they're not going to stop. And Trump has already said that he won't abandon Ukraine, that he won't completely stop providing them with weapons or finance, right? So he said one thing, but he's also said another. Now, Trump has said several, I consider, positive signs. They don't change my calculus, but I do keep them in my mental checkbook, right? Trump made clear that that exactly what Russia has always said, that he agrees that if there hadn't been a push to bring the Ukraine into NATO under the Kiev regime, that this war wouldn't have happened. Which, yeah, that's probably mostly true. And what's more than that is he trashed the entire US and Western narrative by saying, and I understand Russia not wanting NATO to expand there, right? That right away, because they say, oh, Russia has nothing to fear from NATO expansion. We're totally not the most powerful and aggressive military bloc on the planet. Forget Serbia and Libya and all of these post facto Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other things we've been involved in. We're just cuddly defensive teddy bears, right? We're not a platform for U.S. hegemonic power projection. But Trump, he said, I understand Russia not wanting to have NATO in Ukraine, right? That trashes their whole narrative right there. That's actually a big statement, I think, because that does away with the whole, at least the U.S. President-elect is contradicting the West's own narrative that Putin is just a mad Hitler dictator out for a land grab, and that as soon as he's done with Ukraine, he'll be in Poland, and then 2 weeks after that, he'll be in Lisbon, and then he'll be invading Peoria, Wolverines, that whole narrative. Trump just urinated all over it. That's a positive sign in my book. That is a positive sign. But I don't know that it necessarily means that there is going to be an agreed upon end or any type of grand strategic arrangement between a Trump presidency and a Putin presidency to end this conflict or to remake the world order and spheres of influence or anything like that. I just don't believe it's going to happen. Even let's go with Trump's new fantasies that he's going to take over or buy out Canada and Greenland. What does that provide? Let's flip the world map on its head so that we can take a look at the Arctic and the North Pole and see. Suddenly that would make that the U.S. zone of contact in the Arctic suddenly expand all the way, almost meeting Russia's vast zone in the Arctic, setting us up for a war, a resource war, or maybe you don't want to call it a Cold War, a frozen war in the Arctic with the United States. I think Trump really needs to look into that. I don't think he's thought it all through. I don't think he understands that the U.S. has no icebreakers and that Russia has multiple. I mean, they have dozens and dozens of
60,
of icebreakers. They have nuclear powered, just behemoth icebreakers, right? And that's absolutely essential for any type of trade or military action in the Arctic. But, regardless, all of this, he's setting the whole stage for a whole new conflict with Russia over the Arctic. So, and Russia immediately made a response after Greenland and said, we're for peace and stability in the Arctic. And what they're saying to Trump is, we see what you're trying to do there. We're watching, right? Yeah, that's exactly what Russia was saying there. So I don't see any hope for peace between the U.S. and Russia anytime in the future, or the West in general. But even the U.S., even under Trump, they're still inevitably and invariably geopolitical adversaries in multiple different potential conflict zones. And whether Trump cares personally about Ukraine or Zelensky or not, that's really not here or there.
Well, it'll be interesting. Oh, it looks like we have a map. Here, there we go. Here's our map of the Arctic. So, yeah, Mark, I want to maybe dive in a little bit deeper here. I mean, you mentioned the lack of icebreakers. In general, the U.S. has a pretty limited shipbuilding capacity. Yeah. Especially when you consider Russia's relationship with China and some of the advantages.
Let's stop right there. The U.S. has limited building capacity. You don't even have to put the ship in front of that. They literally buy bridges in California from China. Literally.
So what other challenges does the Arctic pose to the United States in getting ready to kind of race to this region of the world? I don't know if there's anything you could tell us about that and the relative disadvantage the United States has.
Yeah,
compared to
the number one is infrastructure. I mean, after icebreakers, the number one is infrastructure. Russia has a lot of infrastructure, both urban areas, right, and the transportation and logistics to those areas in the Arctic, right, as a result of the Soviet Union essentially forcing people to move there, right? And I don't care what they say, Murmansk is lovely. I really enjoy Murmansk. And New Year's is the aurora borealis is absolutely something to see. So I've done that. But the U.S. has nothing up there, right? Even if you take a look at the tiny bit of Alaska, it's all on the southern end of the well, not quite peninsula there. If you take a look at the Canadian population, let's say that Canada becomes the 51st state, right? Let's just play with that fantasy for a while. All of the Canadian population is hugging the US border, right? They have no significant infrastructure in the actual Arctic. Greenland, they got 60,000 people and they're all down at the bottom of Greenland. There is no Western infrastructure in the Arctic, and infrastructure will be absolutely essential to developing resources, whether we're talking gas, offshore gas, or oil, or anything else. They don't have the icebreakers. They don't have the infrastructure. Russia even has mobile floating nuclear power plants to provide energy for rigs and facilities in the Arctic, primed for expansion. Russia has thought seriously for decades about moving into the Arctic, and the North is theirs. And just geographically speaking, taking a look at the Russian continental shelf, there's good reason for that, because Russia owns the majority of the Arctic, or has it for their economic zone to develop. But maybe someone, I can't, this whole Greenland, Canada thing, I really, let's see what is actually going through Trump's head on this, and who talked to him 15 minutes ago that decided that King Donald the Orange should be king of Greenland, right? I don't know, who put that into his head, or what the obvious, what the actual rationale for this is. But I really don't see, this has got to be mostly bluster. Trump is not going to. There are already U.S. troops in Greenland, of course, in the southern zone. There's U.S. military bases there. They could simply walk out of those bases and take over Greenland, much like, let's say, Russian troops in the Crimea, right? Except that the Crimean people, of course, actually wanted the Russian troops there. And I'm not so sure about the people of Greenland. But U.S. is not going to, just take the territory of a NATO member. And of all the NATO members, if you can find more of a lick, spittle, and kiss arse of the U.S. more than Denmark, be my guest, because they have been spying on other European countries for the United States and been caught doing it, right? Western mainstream media headlines. So if Trump really wanted to do something like that, he'd be killed within a week. I'm sorry. The U.S. president would not be allowed to do things like that. So I don't really see all of this as very serious. I see them in the Kremlin, probably. It's not so much popcorn, right? They're probably pulling out some Zukuskis, some marinated pickles or mushrooms or something, and watching what Trump is doing. And I've always said that Trump is a chaos bomb, and the most important and unpredictable thing is where that chaos bomb goes off, right? And you never know where it's going to go off. And we don't actually know for certain yet that it's not going to go off in Ukraine. But right now, the chaos bomb is going off on the transatlantic relationship, right? Which Trump obviously has no love for. He's got personal beef with most of the current European leaders, obviously Orban not being one of those, but Keir Starmer, Olaf Scholz, Macron, right? He hates them all, right? And they all hate him, and he knows it, and he's not going to pretend otherwise. So all of this bluster about Greenland and Canada, that's the Trump chaos bomb, even before he takes office, going off on the transatlantic relationship, which that will certainly be to Russia's benefit, right? To watch NATO eat itself alive. But it's not going to outlast Trump if it even, does those 4 years. So Russia had best take advantage of that opportunity in whatever way they see fit. And almost certainly the the best way to see fit is to finish Ukraine completely on their terms. But I don't take this Arctic stuff in Greenland and very seriously. I really don't. And the icebreakers and infrastructure and all of these other reasons are why. And I don't know who convinced Trump this was some grand strategy or something like that, but they need to go back to strategic theory 101 or 201 at least. I don't know.
Well, I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but it's 2025. I mean, we made it. And I'm interested, Mark, to get
Some of us did.
Some of us did, some of us did not, and we can pour one out later. But I'm interested to get some of your predictions for where Russia's international geopolitical strategy really kind of goes from here. Do you have any big predictions for how relations with China will develop? What will happen in the Caucasus? Are there any kind of areas where you're looking at? You know, we've talked about Ukraine a good deal, but are there any other areas that you're looking at to be potentially decisive or influential in the balance of geopolitical forces when it comes to Russia this year?
So obviously Syria was a big change, and Russia is gone out of Syria. They lost to Erdogan, right? Because that's primarily, yes, the US and the UK and France and Israel were almost certainly involved to some extent, but this was primarily Erdogan. And the Kremlin doesn't want to say it, and the Russian state media doesn't want to talk about Turkey, right? They're all pretending that this didn't happen or didn't go down the way it did. But quite obviously, this is a big smack to Russia's Mideast influence and dreams of Mideast influence. And almost certainly Russia is going to pull out of these bases. They're not going to hand Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Erdogan that type of leverage. Whether Erdogan wants them to stay as some kind of hedge against Israel and the US and the Kurds or not, I don't see Russia. They've been talking about repurposing those bases as humanitarian bases for, Russian grain that goes to Syria and the like. That may be a way for the Russian bases to be put on pause, and we'll see what happens down the road. But they're going to effectively cease to operate as military bases within the next year, almost seriously. And I know there's intentions of moving to Libya, and already some transfers of stuff to Libya. That's again building on sand. Russia's position in Libya is entirely contingent. It's very far away from Russia. Russia doesn't have the ability to project power there if something goes down in Libya. It wasn't so long ago that Erdogan was fighting Russia in Libya, also there, and certainly the Europeans. So I think Russia really needs to really cool down on the dreams of being a player in Africa and the Middle East. That's gone. Signed strategic partnership with Iran. Yes, Iran will become Russia's big, shall we say, partner in the Middle East, and everything will be done with Iran. That's good. That's what it should be. Russia needs to have realistic geopolitical horizons. Eurasia, yes, but Russia needs to have realistic assessments of its geopolitical horizons in the Middle East and Africa at this point, which are not much. They need to concentrate on what's important, and that's Ukraine, right? Above and below. Beyond Ukraine, Moldova, making sure that Lukashenko in Belarus, because obviously they're going to try some color regime shenanigans there with the election there. But that appears stable for the moment as far as we can see. But then again, Syria appeared stable. Or stabler than I thought it was anyway. Georgia appears stable for the moment, despite the attempts there. Armenia, I think Russia's like, you want to kill yourselves? Have fun. Right? I think Russia actually could care less about Armenia at this point, to be perfectly honest. If you want Azerbaijan to eat you alive, then be my guest, right? I think that's seriously what they're saying there. So I don't think they're too concerned about what happens in Armenia at this point. They've we're done with that. But I think Russia needs to double down and focus and see, after everything that's happened, they need to see Ukraine through to the end, not to some Trumpian deal, right? That will, of course, doubtlessly be on American terms, and Trump will be out again in 4 years if it takes that long for them to get rid of him. But Russia needs to keep in mind the long term, and everything we've been hearing from the Kremlin says that is true. So, I mean, right now the two biggest stories in 2025 will be Russia talks to Trump, Russia tells Trump no. What does Trump do?
Yeah.
And the other one will be Russia and Iran signing this new, deeper, strengthened strategic partnership. And I can tell you right now, the neocons like Mike Waltz are going to be whispering in Trump's ear. Look, I know you wanted to be friends with Putin, but he's allied with the mullahs in Iran and the Chinese Communist Party, right? I know you wanted to be friends with him, but you're going to have to do something. I know that is exactly what it is going to be whispered in his ear right now. He's going to stop you in Greenland, right? I don't know, something like that. It's something ridiculous. But regardless, there are geopolitical truths that, Trump will be another speed bump. He might be a bigger speed bump this time than during his first administration, and he might create more problems for the transatlantic relationship, which is great for Russia. As long as the chaos bomb stays going off over there, that's perfectly fine for the Kremlin. But that bomb can always bounce around a bit. Could be a bouncing Betsy, and could end up somewhere else. So.
Well, we have gone over an hour, but that's okay. We do have some super chats to get to. Cletus, thank you so much for coming to work and not having us pay you. Cletus pays us to come to work, apparently. And John has asking you, Mark, can Russia just take the Dnieper and River and Odessa without having to occupy more of the country?
I don't think so. I think unless we see a more significant collapse of the Kiev regime military, then a contested crossing of the Dnieper is still very difficult. You'll notice that when the Kiev regime was focusing on the Black Sea Fleet, they did take a particular interest in a lot of transport ships. I think there was some method to that madness there. So Russia has reduced capability. And to get to Odessa, you've got to first cross and take Kherson City, and then Nikolaev, and only then Odessa. Even in World War II, the Red Army went the long way around Kiev and then down to take Odessa. So as much as I've got family in Odessa, right? So my wife's extended, yes, they're Crimean. We've got some family in Donbass and Kharkov and Odessa. I want to see Odessa is a Russian city. It was founded by Catherine the Great. The people there, other than the Banderites who have moved in from West Ukraine, it is a Russian city. And I want it to be Russian at the end of this conflict, however long it takes. But it's nothing that is going to happen this year, at the very least, right? Maybe not for, 2027, 2028. I don't want to jump the gun here, but it's nothing that is going to happen immediately. A contested crossing of the Dnieper to move eventually into Odessa is not in the cards.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Black pill.
We always leave you with the black pill when it's Mark Sleboda. You guys get your weekend off to a great start under the dark rain cloud that Mark Sleboda has just placed over your head. And make sure you follow him on both Telegram and Twitter, while we still have Twitter. And we will see you guys maybe next time, which I don't know when that will be. So catch us in the spaces. Find Mark on Telegram. Say hi to John somewhere. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Cheers.
Dude.